Hello everyone, my name is Tess McLaughlin, and my video will be about the genre of folk music and will focus specifically on Joan Baez. So, folk music originated at the turn of the century and was first started by a group called the International Workers of the World, or IWW for short. They began writing protest songs in an effort to achieve equality for American workers. The songs that they wrote formed the basis for the entire folk movement and inspired many folk singers to come. Woody Guthrie carried on their tradition of writing protest songs. His songs include This Land is Your Land and many others. That is a picture of him there with his famous guitar that says This Machine Kills Fascists. Pete Seeger and the Weavers were also inspired by IWW and Woody Guthrie and wrote classics such as The Hammer Song and Goodnight Irene. Guthrie, Seeger, and the Weavers became unpopular during the era of McCarthyism, and folk music fell under the radar until the early 60s. During this time, many famous people came under scrutiny and were accused of holding communist beliefs. Guthrie and Seeger were some of the artists who were accused of communism because of their progressive views. However, folk music became popular in the 60s amongst college students who were hungry for change. They turned away from the rock music of the 50s in favor of folk music. Bob Dylan, who is in the picture on the left there, helped lead this movement and continued the tradition of writing and singing protest songs. The folk movement was highly influenced by politics, I think more so than many other genres of music. The civil rights movement and the Vietnam War both played a large role in the folk movement of the 60s. People became very politically active during this time. For instance, sit-ins and boycotts were used to protest segregation, and there were major protests such as the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. JFK also openly supported equal rights for African Americans, which earned him the support of many college-age adults. All of these factors contributed to the popularization of the folk movement. So now I will move on to Joan Baez. She was born in 1941 to a Mexican father and a Scotch-Irish mother. She grew up in a small town in New York and faced racial discrimination at a young age, which was a large influence for her music. Some of her musical influences include Harry Belafonte, Odetta, and Pete Seeger. She is also considered to be Bob Dylan's female counterpart in the protest movement. She sang covers of many of his songs, and they even dated for a short time in the 60s. Joan Baez made her debut at the Newport Folk Festival in 1959 and released her self-titled debut album in 1960. Most of her songs were protest songs about the war and segregation. Due to her unique voice and passionate stance on politics, she was massively successful. However, her main goal was not to make money. She said at one point, "Folk music depends on intent. If someone desires to make money, I don't call it folk music." As I said before, Joan Baez was very influenced by the events going on in the world around her, and she was very devoted to making an impact. She was highly motivated by the anti-war and social justice movements. Because of this, she was very politically active. For example, she performed at the March on Washington in 1963. The picture on the left is a picture of her and Bob Dylan performing there together. She also opened the Institute for the Study of Nonviolence and visited Vietnam during the war, where she survived the Christmas bombings in North Vietnam. This experience was the inspiration for her song, Where Are You Now, My Son? She is still politically active today. She actually performed at Standing Rock in North Dakota to protest the Dakota Pipeline and marched in the Women's March following the 2016 election. As far as fashion goes, Joan Baez's style was very understated. The focus was more on what she had to say in her music and less on what she was wearing. She often wore wide-leg pants and plain t-shirts. She wore her hair long and parted it down the middle and went barefoot a lot of the time. That picture on the right there is a really good example of the simplicity with which she dressed. Her style lacked a lot of the drama and glamour that many other singers of the 60s and 70s had, but I think this just adds to the impact of her music. Overall, Joan Baez used her powerful voice, along with her powerful message, to leave a lasting impact on the folk genre that is still seen today. Here are all of my references, and thank you for listening.